I'm delighted today to be joined by Leslee Udwin, the founder of Think Equal. What do you understand the purpose of education to be?
I think education should prepare a human being for a life that is dignified and that is led in respect of the dignity of others. I think that is the core purpose of early years education. Now, I make that distinction because pretty much by the age of 6, the child's character in certain respects, neuroscientifically speaking, in respect of habitual ways of responding, emotional control, those are determined, set, hardwired by the age of 6, because the activity in the developing brain flatlines at that age. So in those respects, and those respects are particularly significant when we think about perpetrating violent crimes, for example, right? The core purpose of early years education should be to ensure that those trajectories, those neuropathways in the physical architecture of the brain are expressive of control, habits and reflexes that are loving, that are pro-social, not discriminating, constructive, decent, dignified. And so to me, that's the core purpose of early years education. Now, obviously, as a child grows, there are other aspects to education which are important. I'm not going to go as far as to say equally important, because there is so much balance to be righted in respect of the fact that what I've just described as the core purpose isn't even acknowledged in this broken system of education we have, which is simply not fit for purpose. And we've neglected this situation for so long now. It's more than 200 years since the first industrial revolution. And that is when this education system of ours was designed. In that period, for that period, the purpose of education as designed in and for the Industrial Revolution was to fill factories. So the education system as we know it, as we practice it, is pretty much this narrow, straight path to a job in the labor market. And I would venture to say a job that no longer exists in the labor market of today, but on they plod with their numeracy and literacy and testing. Now, the first thing I say to an education minister or policymaker when I meet them and try to persuade them to bring Think Equal front and center into their education system, the first question I ask them is, you who have a duty of care to our youngest children, how can you deem it to be compulsory for these children to learn numeracy and literacy in a world in which we now have computers and spell checks? And how can you deem it to be compulsory for them to learn that, and yet it's optional for them to learn how to value another human being? It's optional for them to learn how to lead healthy relationships, how to take care of the earth, our common home. Optional? This cannot be optional. And who is teaching our children this? We're leaving it to the parents. Well, that's a huge mistake, because the parents, for the most part, haven't learned to do it themselves and don't know how to do it. The parents can only cyclically, generationally teach their children how to be what they have been.
So it's this idea essentially of leaving to chance the core purpose of education in your eyes. This is these ideas of understanding, of empathy, the emotional intelligence, these things, these are being left to chance. And so we don't actually see the educational purpose that you are talking about in reality, essentially.
And in fact, what is happening is that worse than being left to chance, they are actually being left to repetition of patterns of behavior that are already without well-being, that are already sick, damaged.
What kinds of things need to change fundamentally, do you think? What are the first steps to making the progress that you're on about?
Okay, so the thing that really confounds me on a daily basis and makes me frustrated and sometimes furious is the degree to which, number one, we have become so entrenched in what Pope Francis calls the globalization of indifference. The way we are so accepting of the fact that, well, that's, it's an enormous task. I mean, to change the system of education, to bring this learning into every classroom, we've sort of lost our sense of hope. We've lost our sense of purpose in terms of any sense of empowerment that we can actually achieve this. Well, I'm absolutely, utterly, completely convinced. But what we need to do is shift our mind from continuing discussion, measurement, awareness. How much more of that can we have? We know what the issues are. We know what the problems are. Where's the action? Without action, all of these, education frameworks that some enlightened countries have actually got together by now, because they are realizing that, yes, early years education is the key. They're realizing this increasingly. They are realizing that children, have adverse childhood experiences. This affects them in every way as they grow up, even in terms of their, not just mental health, but physical health. There's a direct correlation, for example, now proven between toxic stress in early childhood, caused by adverse childhood experiences, and cardiovascular disease. It is as big a predictor of cardiovascular disease in adult life, stress in early childhood, as any other predictor of cardiovascular disease, right? So the understanding and the knowledge about how important this is increasing, but somehow we are still stuck in this rut of theoretical frameworks, academic papers, measuring the problem. I mean, without action, all of this is hollow. It's meaningless. It's of some limited interest to academics. The bottom line is we need pragmatic, practical, concrete, programmatic tools to do this. And I think, for me, that is the unique approach, or let's say rare approach, because not unique in the sense that there are no others. What's unique about Think Equal as an initiative, as a program, because it's also a movement, of course. We are seeking a system change in education. We advocate for that. But what matters most about it is a very concrete and prescriptive program, so that practitioners, particularly in the early years, where the workforce is mostly undertrained, unskilled for the most part, definitely underpaid, definitely under-respected. We've been treating our teachers in the early years like babysitters, as opposed to rightly the people who hold the future of our children in their hands. We have to make this program prescriptive and as concrete as possible for that reason. If we were to take the view that we will first train the workforce, we'll be sitting here for another several decades with nothing being done. And even then, you will never train a workforce equally, so that in particularly a new subject, a new dimension to education like social-emotional learning, so that each and every one of them are able to mediate these critical competencies and skills to children in an even-handed way. You'll never achieve that, because some teachers will be more talented than others. Some will be less lazy than others. There will always be these variances. What we say in Think Equal is, it is every single child's right, no matter what background they come from, no matter whether they're in a developing country, so-called, or a so-called developed countries, which we're increasingly seeing now. There's very little evidence of a country deserving to be called that. Every single child has the right to positive outcomes in life. Every child has the right to not grow up and rape, because we've taught that child that actually women are, you know, if they do this and this, they're fair game, or women generally are sexual objects, men have these needs. You know, every child has a right to grow up and not become depressed, because they have learned, have been given the skills, the competencies to control their big emotions of sadness, of anger. Who's teaching this to our children? It's critical for them to lead a life that is halfway decent. They need these skills, but we're not giving them these skills. We're leaving it, as you said, either to chance or to parents who are basically teaching them how to hit out rather than control anger. So in order to ensure that every child can get this, we need that learning to be mediated in a prescriptive way. And you know, Kushal, I liken this to a vaccination, and I was using the terminology of vaccination and pandemic of violence and discrimination before COVID-19. But it seems to me to be absolutely a justifiable metaphor, because, you know, we have a pandemic of discrimination, which leads to violence. Discrimination is the disease, the violence is the symptom of it, but we have a pandemic of it around the world. In the face of a pandemic, we don't say to our doctors and nurses, you concoct a vaccination, decide, you know, which ingredients, how many doses, up to you. You know, you decide. No, we spend a lot of time, a lot of research in terms of, you know, developing and then testing and ensuring that a vaccine which has exact ingredients to the milligram, exact number of doses. Well, it's the same with this vaccination against violence and discrimination, which is, it needs to be taught regularly. So we teach it 3 times a week over an entire academic year for 30 weeks. That's 90 lessons in each of 3 levels. We teach it between the ages of 3 and 6, because that's when we can get the greatest impact within a system. I mean, you tell me how we can get hold of 1 and 2 year olds, where the child's brain is developing at an even more accelerated rate, and I'll go in there, but there is no place we can go to find them, whereas the education system is a system we can enter and give this learning, and we do it prescriptively for that reason, because it's a vaccination, and it has to be effective and it has to be impactful. It's every child's right for it to be.
What you think people should be doing, right? The average person, what should they be doing right now with regards to these questions?
Okay. The only thing that counts is getting the programs that exist. And I'm sorry to say that in the early years space, they are very few and far between, okay? Think Equal is one of them. Of course, there are others. I think what's special about Think Equal is it teaches 25 competencies and skills. You'll find other programs that are practical, that have lesson plans that are concrete, easy to implement, but they, for example, will focus on mindfulness. Very important. But mindfulness is one of the 25 competencies and skills Think Equal teaches. They might focus on emotional intelligence, critically important. But that is just two of the competencies Think Equal teaches, because in emotional intelligence, we teach emotional literacy, the recognizing of emotions and the subtle differences.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very important to know what the difference is between anger and frustration and when each is appropriate. And emotional literacy on the one hand and emotional control on the other. Those are the two pillars of emotional intelligence. But now we've spoken only about 3 of the 25. I haven't yet come across a program, particularly in the early years, that teaches gender equality as well. How critical is that?
Yeah.
You know, our children are growing up with images on billboards, with images in magazines, with, you know, that is part of their cultural education. They're being taught at home, and if we're talking about the India context, well, every country has different expressions of the same thing. There's, you know, patriarchal landscape in every single part of the world. That is how it's been operating. It is definitely now, I believe, time for women to lead. And we look around the world, and where we do see extraordinary, you know, women leaders, we see extraordinary change. And I hope, I pray that that is the way we're going more and more. But, you know, in India, culturally, we're teaching our boys and our girls that they are different, that there are rules that pertain to girls that do not pertain to boys, that girls have to wait to eat last at table, that boys should get a full glass of milk, a girl only needs a half a glass because a boy needs more energy. You know, from the very, very first breath, we're teaching our children gender inequality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how can we not right that balance while the brain is still developing? But who's doing it? Where are the programs? Well, Think Equal is one such. So what can the ordinary human being do? Get together, 25 of you, put $10 in each. That's $250. That is the cost of all the training, all the materials, all the support, which we will continue to give to that teacher. It's the cost of implementing Think Equal in a classroom. A classroom will typically have maybe 30 kids in India, 40 kids in some classrooms. And those materials and that training of that teacher lasts not just for that year, but for as long as that teacher will take care of those materials. They don't need anything else. There's no further money needed the following year or the following or the following. As long as the teacher takes care of the materials, they can keep teaching that for 10 years. So that's not 30 kids, it's 300 kids for $10 each. That's what citizens can be doing, is getting in there and saying, we are putting they can volunteer. They can say, you know what, we can't, every penny we have is going to our school fees, for example, our university fees. But we know people, friends of our parents who are in business, we will ask them to sponsor a school. I mean, all we need, and the only thing that'll make a difference, is concrete programming. We have the programming. It's the most minimal, pathetically ridiculous cost. We're working with the South African government now to, I'm thrilled to say, give Think Equal to every single 5-year-old in the whole country. 12,350 odd classrooms. And we were working out, in terms of the cost-benefit ratio, it costs the same amount to incarcerate one violent offender for 1 year in South Africa as it costs to give Think Equal to 5,100 children. And giving Think Equal to 5,100 children means, for an entire year, everything that's required to teach those children to not be violent. What are we doing as a world? How insane have we actually become that we would rather deal with the fallout from violence after the fact, when there's nothing we can do about it? How are we putting all of our effort and money and energy into rehabilitation of offenders instead of prevention of offenses in the first place? And the extraordinary thing about Think Equal, and anybody listening, please, please go onto the website, www.thinkequal.org, and see what those materials are. And by the way, we've got a giveaway right now of 6 weeks worth of free books, materials, lesson plans, both for classrooms and for homes. It's our response to COVID-19. We adapted the program very quickly for parents with children at home. So go get the materials, disseminate them. They're all completely free. But do, go on that website and see how easy, how concrete it is. And that is what is needed, action. We've got the programs, they're replicable, they're scalable, and they're ridiculously cheap. We should be putting all our energies and efforts into ensuring that our children have got the foundation in each of our communities, our village, our town, our country, our world, have got the foundation for positive outcomes in life. That's what we should be doing.